Welcome back to afternoon session. I'm Tomoko Bayano, Japanese Studies Librarian at UCLA Library. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jennifer Chen. She's joining us remotely. Okay. Jennifer is my colleague, and she's a scholarly communication librarian at the UCLA Library. She has multiple certifications related to United States copyright law. Her service includes assisting faculty and students in scholarly communication, open access, and open education strategies. The title of her talk is Bringing Endangered Languages into the Open, How Open Educational Practices Can Help Save Human Knowledge from Going Extinct. So we have a 10 minutes Q&A following her talk. And Jennifer, please take the podium remotely.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tomoko, and everybody. Thank you for your attention today. And can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. So first off, thank you to the organizers for the invitation and this opportunity to present. My apologies for not being able to be there in person today. And my second apology will be that if there are any areas that we're not able to cover to your satisfaction today, I apologize. But we do have some time at the end for Q&A, and I will be available to answer any questions that you may have on the topics that we cover today. So that's a picture of me on the left. And as Tomoko mentioned, I work at UCLA Library on a number of different areas involving academic publishing, both traditional conventional means, as well as some of the more digital ways that we do things. And I do have multiple certifications related to US copyright law. So most of the statements that I make will be grounded in US copyright. Fortunately, most of those areas that we'll be covering today are pretty similar across multiple geographic distributions. So we should be generally okay with what I'm saying in your jurisdiction. So for my talk, broadly, we'll be in 3 sections. The first, I'll talk about open access, providing you with a definition. I'm sure that many of you in the room probably have already heard a little bit about open access at some point. Talk about expectations of open access as well as some benefits. And then I'll share with you some specific examples from eScholarship, the institutional repository of the University of California. And then finally, the rest of the time we'll spend on public copyright licenses. I'll specifically cover the Creative Commons license. And there'll be time for questions at the end, but I'll pause in between each of these 3 sections since I'm unfortunately remote. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those into the chat. Thank you. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and get right into the material that I have for you. So the first is, well, what is open access? Here I'm showing you the definition from UNESCO that defines open access as a means for free access to information and unrestricted use of electronic resources for everyone. And by everyone, we mean individuals that are not necessarily affiliated with any educational institution or any corporate institution, but really the public at large. Any kind of digital content can be open access, from text and data to software, audio, video, as well as multimedia. And you'll see at the top here a few examples in CJK languages of open access translated. So there are a number of different expectations when we talk about open access and when we talk about openness. This is the open that I'm alluding to in the title of this presentation. And what we really are talking about first and foremost is free read access. So the ability to read the resource freely without a paywall, without having to have a subscription, without having to pay for the materials in order to read and view them. So this is the most basic level of open access. It is the level in which you're really only able to read. There's not necessarily any guarantees of any other rights or privileges to the user. But in the next bullet, we're talking about open licensing as well. This allows the work to be not just free to read, but also available under one of multiple different licenses that allows the user to do some degree of either manipulation or additional sharing of that work. And then finally, the broadest level of openness would involve some degree of reuse or remix permissions. So we're taking that original work and adapting it in some sort of way. So different formats might be a possibility. It may be possible that we're translating the resource from one language to another. It may be possible that we're transmitting that information differently. So maybe we're going from not only from print to digital, but we're going from print to maybe audio visual. So these are all different remix levels of use. And then finally, one of the things that we want to talk about is really about adaptation of the work. So these are all different levels of openness that can be possible with an open access resource. So there are also some commonly cited benefits to open access. And these largely involve, of course, first, the ability to have the public access your work freely. But there are some limitations, or rather some requirements that some funding institutions may have with respect to open access. This is true for the United States in terms of federal funding for educational research. There's frequently a requirement that the products of that research be made open access. But over time, we've also seen that there are other things that are beneficial with respect to open access, such as the addition of quicker and more citations of academic research that's been released and published open access, as well as broader networks of researchers that are now familiar with an individual's research and work as a result of that. So, okay, I'm going to move on to my next slide. So if you have any questions about open access or the definitions of open access, please feel free to put that in the Q&A. I will be moving on now to talking about eScholarship. What you're seeing here is the landing page for UCLA's part of the institutional repository. So eScholarship is our open access online institutional repository for the entire University of California system. UCLA specifically has our own section of that repository, but anyone can read any of the materials within the repository, regardless of which of the 10 campuses they're interested in. And also all of our faculty, as well as staff and students, have privileges to deposit materials in eScholarship. So for the purposes of this symposium, the Asia Pacific Center and the UCLA Library have worked together to make it possible so that presenters are allowed to use the eScholarship repository to preserve and disseminate your proceedings to this event in eScholarship. You will have received an email from Professor Iwasaki about this opportunity. If you have any questions about the deposit agreement, I do have some time reserved at the end to talk about that as well. I know that we do have some researchers who have already provided their submissions to the forum, and so we're happy to include your work in the institutional repository. So why open access for endangered languages? I was listening to the presenter earlier, and one of the things that struck me was really about the importance of preservation and dissemination. And these are two attributes of the eScholarship repository that are essentially automatic. As soon as your work goes into the repository, you're going to be able to reach the broadest possible audience. So with respect to eScholarship, we are indexed with Google Scholar, and you're also able to make the information available by tweeting or sharing your link to your information, your actual object in the repository to any of the researchers around the world. And because it's an open access repository, there's no restrictions to access for that. We're also going to be maximizing technological benefits of going digital, since the University of California is going to take responsibility for the long-term preservation, as well as guaranteeing access to the materials that are going to be in that repository. Anything that you put into the repository has fast and instantaneous dissemination. So we're going from something very fast to something immediate. I remember helping Professor Iwasaki with something that we'll look at in just a moment, and it got views very quickly in the repository. One of the things that I think is a very important benefit for eScholarship is the fact that there are no territorial restrictions. Oftentimes, research is confined either to a geographic location or just there's a barrier to access. In this case, we're helping to eliminate that territorial barrier. by putting this work into an open access repository. I mentioned the long-term preservation guarantee, and this is something that as long as the University of California continues to persist, which I hope we do for a very long time, your work will be available and accessible in eScholarship. So one of the other benefits that we haven't talked about yet is really about the impact of this on other researchers who are interested in similar or the same research areas as you. This does allow them to freely access your resources easily and freely. So certainly I do encourage you to buy the books that our researchers have been promoting, but also if there's works that are being able to be shared through eScholarship, I definitely encourage that as well. And finally, based on citation advantages that we've seen in the past, we certainly do think that there will be a broader impact for your efforts. Now, I promised to show you some examples, so I have two of them pulled out. So here's an example that we have in the eScholarship repository. This is one of our OERs, or Open Educational Resources. This is a collaborative work that was created with students and an instructor of an upper-level Japanese language course. So the students actually were the primary authors of this particular resource that's now available in eScholarship. This volume has provided a lot of pedagogical benefits for the students who are participating in the creation of this resource. But beyond that, it's also allowed a lot of students who are learning Japanese in these materials to be able to access this resource within their classes. And these are students that are not enrolled at UCLA, but are actually all over the world. I think we held a workshop related to this particular topic in the past, and I think we had 14 other countries that were participating in that workshop related to this particular work. So you can see here with eScholarship, one of the other benefits that we have is that the system will automatically collect and save the impact-related usage information for your particular work. So you can see with this particular work, it was released at the very end of 2019, so it was just before campuses shut down due to the pandemic. And we were able to make this resource available as a learning aid, not only for the students at UCLA, but also students elsewhere. So the students who were involved in this particular class have felt that this was a very worthwhile way to share and make their learning much more impactful than just doing homework. Right? And then here, the second example that I have for you. Some of you may recognize the names of the authors. This work, of course, is the Ikema Dictionary that Professor Iwasaki mentioned earlier ago. This is actually what I'm showing you is the first printing of the Ikema Dictionary that was shared in eScholarship just in October, at the very end of October of last year. And you can see here, even though there was a limited print run, and yes, it is available in print, but we do have more than 400 uses in just a few short months for the eScholarship version of this work. And in fact, we now have the second printing of the Ikema Dictionary also now on eScholarship, which has an expanded correspondence section between Japanese and Ikema. So that is now also available on eScholarship. We only put that work on last month. You can already see the scholars around the world have discovered the material in eScholarship. And I mentioned to you that this is a resource that's available to the general public. So it may be the case that the works that you have deposited into eScholarship may be of interest to members of the general public who may take up learning and using a language that might be in danger of becoming extinct. So if you would like to take part in the dissemination and preservation benefits of eScholarship, please feel free to deposit your deposit agreement with us before you leave UCLA. If you do have questions about that, I will be happy to answer those questions at the end of this talk, or if you have questions that you'd like to talk to me about directly, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay. And then finally, if you have questions that you'd like to put in the chat about that, this is your opportunity to do so. I will be moving on to the next section, where I'll be talking about copyright and public copyright licenses. So just very briefly, again, This is a definition that's grounded in the US law, but it is very much the case in most jurisdictions that participate in the Berne Convention. So with copyright, copyright protects works of authorship, such as writings, music, and works of art that have been tangibly expressed. A license is a written agreement granting a third party permission to use a copyrighted work. It is an explicit written agreement, not an oral one, and it must be executed by the copyright owner in order for it to be valid. Right? If you have any questions about copyright, please feel free to post those. Okay. So now I'm going to talk really about the public copyright license. This is a category of license that grants rights to the general public and requires no additional effort from the copyright owner or the public licenses in order for them to take effect. You can see some examples of them here below. And here's one of the most commonly used public copyright licenses for research and scholarship, which is the Creative Commons license. Creative Commons is a US nonprofit organization that is devoted to expanding the range of creative works available for others to build upon legally and to share. So as a creator of the work, you have the authority to be able to designate what rights you might want an end user to be able to have. So a CC license will permanently and quickly communicate you, the author's wishes, to users about your desire for attribution and whether or not and to what degree they're able to reuse or remix your work. A few things to note about Creative Commons. Creative Commons does not waive copyright. What it does, however, is it quickens your reuse and remix rates by eliminating that permission-seeking step. So that's a really key bit. It actually makes it a lot quicker for the user, and also there's less paperwork burden on the author. Creative Commons licenses are in fact internationally recognized. There has been litigation in courts in Europe as well as in Asia that have recognized the validity of the Creative Commons license. It's important to note that at the current time, Creative Commons licenses are considered to be irrevocable, meaning that they cannot be changed or reversed once they've been affixed to a work. You can always produce a new version and affix a different Creative Commons license to that, but at this current time, it's viewed as being an irrevocable license. And then finally, there is some murkiness about derivatives, which could mean that those reuse rights may be a bit ambiguous. Right? So in order to speed up access to endangered language resources, we can utilize open access as a way to additionally disseminate the resources and research to members of the public at large. We can also use an OA repository to preserve and allow for future use of the subject repository. There are other repositories that are available that I should mention at this point. I have talked only about eScholarship, but there exists subject repositories as well as general repositories out there. Your work may or may not be eligible for that, so you would definitely want to check the scope of those repositories as to whether or not they're eligible for your use. And then a use of a public copyright license, such as Creative Commons, is a way to hasten the remix and reuse of your works. So I know that was pretty quick in terms of covering Creative Commons. There may be some questions about that. So if there are, I definitely invite you to ask your questions since we are at the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
So now I'd like to take questions and comments from the audience.
Can I ask one quick question? Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I have one short question. Is the corpus here presented today, is it mainly written or spoken or naturally occurring discourse data?
With respect to putting that into the
The
repository?
Oh, excuse me.
Is the question related
I-
to whether what type of material is going to be ingested into the repository?
I was just wondering about the existence of a spoken, naturally occurring discourse data in your corpus. Is it available? Just wondering.
I'm
Do you
sorry.
have any corpus data? Okay, do you have any corpus data on e-scholarship?
Could you type in that last bit because I'm not catching what.
Oh. Natural discourse, compositional data.
Conversational data. Do you have any corpus data on do you have any corpus data on e-scholarship?
Sorry, I'm still not catching that. What? Why don't I catch up with you after to address that with you directly?
Data.
Corpus.
Okay.
So eScholarship is a repository that primarily has uploaded versions of published works in terms of previously published works. So it is completely open. There are some site policies related to usage of the site. It is not a repository that is just blank data sets. So there are data repositories out there that exist. So if that's what you're looking for, that would be more on the use side of the end user. This is really something that we're offering as a service for you to upload and preserve the proceedings to this event. If that doesn't answer your questions, I'm happy to follow up with you separately.
Yeah, the reason why I raised this question is that in the case of Korean, the Korean government somehow was able to collect naturally occurring discourse data spoken by Korean native speakers in different areas. So it could, the purpose was so helpful for my research, my students, because we can always count frequency, the role of frequency and the pitch, prosodic pictures as well. So I was wondering if that kind of purpose is existing in your data. Just a question.
The short answer to that is it would depend on what the researcher is making available. It is possible for eScholarship to ingest and support all different data formats. It's not just text, there's AV material on there as well. There's image material on there as well. So it's agnostic to what the format of the data is, and it is going to be dependent on what our researchers are uploading into the repository.
Okay, thank you. I think also the professor was asking if there is already such data existed on e-scholarship or other IR repositories, if you are aware of.
So there are a number of repositories and depositories. They're a little bit different. So repositories, there's one that I'm thinking of right now called Zenodo, Zenodo. There is a University of California connection with that repository. And it is a place where you could put corpus data. There is a lot of bioscience corpus data on there. So there's a lot of botanical data on there as well. So if you have a subject or a linguistic repository that you use, you certainly are welcome to include that information. And so for the records that we have in our repository, it's also possible for you to specify in your metadata if you have another external source. So you can connect and link to other places within your record for your object. Are there any other questions that follow up to that, or any other questions in general? So here I'm just showing you a copy of our deposit agreement that you were provided a copy of back in April. If you do have any questions about this particular form, if you still have any reservations about that, I'm happy to address those with you. You can definitely email me about this. And if not, thank you so much for your time.
Jennifer, you're still here?
Yes.
Jennifer, you still here? Okay.
Jennifer, another question here from the audience. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, do I need to go to the stage to use the microphone?
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear?
Okay. Okay, yeah, so the question is, for many of the corpuses and datasets you just mentioned, including that Ikema dictionary dataset, what exactly are the license of them? And suppose if like any commercial companies, they want to utilize these datasets, say like OpenAI want to support the Ikema language in their GPT-4, and they want to use these, like maybe not commercially licensed datasets, like what are the required process for them, like in order to use them? Because I suppose they are not open, the public domain datasets like CC0, right?
So
Like if they
okay.
want to like come to you, like come to use it, what do I do?
So what you can do is tell us before you put it in or when it's in there exactly which license you want to use. So one of the benefits that we have here is that we're not prescribing that it has to be any particular license. In fact, if you want to put it in there and have it only be free to read and have no remix or reuse licenses, you can do that. So it's not a situation where we are requiring you to openly license the work. You can make it free to read. That would be open access, but it's the most basic level that I discussed with you earlier. It would not include any of the remix reuse rights. So now let me talk about specifically AI and ChatGPT and all of these other technologies. They do not actually need to license any of your works because they're employing something called fair use in order to ingest the material. So what they're doing is they're machine reading entire bodies of work. And the legal argument is that the machine is reading this the same way that a human is reading this. They're not supposed to replicate or reproduce in an identical way the materials that they're ingesting. What they're supposed to do is that information is supposed to train their model, and then you can, based on that, generate something new from that existing material. But by no means do you have the requirement to put a very lenient CC license on your work. Anything that is available right now on the internet online is subject to being crawled by a number of different types of technologies, not limited to AI. If that is something that you're concerned about, you certainly want to investigate your no robots options related to the limitations on that. And you can explicitly have within your own site usage terms, different restrictions related to that. So that's something that's a little bit different than what we're talking about with eScholarship, but within eScholarship itself, you do not have to license it such that they're able to do anything outside of what would be fair use.
Because I'm actually speaking from a commercial company's perspective, and like we are going to support a minority language in the product, but the company policies limits like any unlicensed usage of the data set. So it's like, and especially in some non-AI applications. I'm not only talking about OpenAI GPTs, but also, I don't know if you ever heard of Common Voice. It's called, it's an automatic speech recognition data set, and also some other like Google Translate, to translate data sets. Those are not really like AI applications, but we still want to use these dictionary data, and we don't see any license on it, and then like we are discouraged from using it.
So it's a little bit tricky here, and this is something that I can talk to you about a little bit more, but it kind of goes outside the scope of what we're talking about.
So I mean, my theory, yeah, it's like if we want to.
So I hope I'll be able to be present tomorrow. So maybe we can find some time where we can have a conversation about this.
Okay, Jennifer, another question. Yes.
Yeah, it's not well in relation to his question.
All right, yes.
The Ikema dictionary is licensed as CC BY, so you can use it any way you like.
Commercially?
Commercially.
Right.
Have a choice.
Okay.
Any
Yes.
questions from online?
So I'll just summarize very quickly with respect to each scholarship. We'll recognize and respect any license that the authors put on there. So for ICMA, it is CC BY. For the work that I showed you related to the student works, there is a CC BY, I think it's a NC 4.0 on there. So folks who are scholars and instructors have the ability to use it, but the instructor and authors did not want for a commercial entity to ingest and then replicate it. So there are different levels of restrictions related to the materials in that. The rights are pretty clearly indicated. I think I don't want to go over in terms of my time, so I'll just pause here, but thank you very much for the questions and for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you. This is concluding this presentation, and thank you so much for listening. And now I pass the mic to next speaker, Dr.